Today we're going to be learning Yevamot Daf Pei. Today's daf is sponsored by Judy and Gerald Shapiro in memory of their dear cousin Judy Greenberg Hirsch of Chatsworth, California, who passed away this week. Judy was an early member of the Chavura movement in LA and was an amazing person, Zichrona Livracha. Today's daf is sponsored by Shiur Krebs in honor of Rena Berger's birthday. Today is the special birthday of my sister and number one Daf Yomi supporter. Happy birthday. Okay, we're going to get started at the bottom of our daf, at the bottom of yesterday's daf, at the bottom of Ayin Tet Amud Bet. We ended with this question, left you in suspense, which is, we have, if you remember, let's just review the Mishna. We started with Rabbi Yoshua saying that I heard that a saris is choletz and choltzim liishto. And then he says, but I also heard the opposite. And then we had two versions. Rabbi Akiva, who said version number one is saris chama, is the one who doesn't. Someone from birth doesn't do chalitza, but the one who is injured throughout at some point in his life would do chalitza. And what's the difference? Because he had a shata kosher. He at some point was capable of having children. Rabbi Eliezer says the exact opposite. He says, no, we're distinguishing between who can be healed and who can't. Someone who's castrated during his life can't be healed. Someone who is born with some problem, some issue that wouldn't allow him to have children could theoretically be healed. We'll see later today why he believed that the person could be healed. So now we're going to have a question, which is, Ikri kan lakim shem, lakim lachiv shem, on 4 lines from the bottom of Ayin Tet Amud Bet. It says in the pasuk, the whole purpose of yibum is to have a child. And Haila Barachihu, this saris is not. So Rabbi Akiva, how could you say, okay, right now we're on Rabbi Akiva, that a saris chama can't do chalitza, but a saris adam can, but he can't have children. So why is he doing chalitza? Or why are we doing chalitza for his wife? Amarava im ken, ein lecha isha shekshera liyabam shelo nase bala saris chama sha'a achat kodem lemitzato. He said, everybody theoretically becomes a saris chama an hour before dying. Because basically, or it doesn't really mean a saris chama here, it means if you hold that hayalo shata kosher doesn't help you, well, everybody, a minute, an hour, maybe a week before they die is so weak that they're not capable of having children anymore, which means they're a saris. So, and they're a saris adam. So if you're going to say a saris adam you can't do chalitza for a saris adam, nobody will ever do chalitza because every man, some moment before death, will end up being a saris. So that's why he says it must be because he could have in his lifetime. We don't view the moment of death as an important point or an hour before death or a week before death. That doesn't matter. That proves that a saris adam would do chalitza because otherwise you won't have anybody doing chalitza. Kind of, funny kind of comment where Rabbi says here. So now they say, well, Rabbi Eliezer, peruka de Rabbi pirchahi. Now that knocks out Rabbi Eliezer's opinion because why? Rabbi Eliezer said, a saris chama is the one who could theoretically be healed and will do chalitza. But someone who can't be healed doesn't do chalitza. Now, take a man right before he's about to die. So he can't have children at this point. He's a saris, so to speak. So now, can he be healed? No, because he's about to die. He's at the end of his life. He's not going to be healed. So if that's your criteria, Rabbi Eliezer, this is going to raise a big problem to your whole theory. So they say, okay, don't look at a man an hour or a week before his death. This is a weakness that comes upon him before death. This is not saris. Saris is someone who has a particular problem. This isn't a person who just becomes weak and therefore can't start bearing children right now. That's not what we're talking about. So therefore, you can't learn from this anything, and it doesn't contradict Rabbi Eliezer opinion. Now we get into the question, so first, let's just assume we have saris adam and saris chama. We already know what saris chama is, but in case you didn't know, they're going to tell you. Okay, meaning he was already like this from birth. Okay. Now the question is, how do you know that somebody, right? When do you generally know? When they're in the childbearing, right? When they get old enough that they could have children and then they can't have children. But how would you know this from birth? What are signs of a saris from when they're born? Amar Abaye, kol matil mayim ve'eino oseh kippah. Okay, if a child, when he urinates in the beginning and it doesn't make like a kippah, like an arched formation, okay, then it shows that there's some kind of issue. Mimai havye. So what causes this, right? This is the classic. You have a birth defect. What causes birth defects? What things should you avoid in your pregnancy from doing because they might cause birth defects? Okay, so this might sound a little strange, but it's really not if you think about it in that sense. Everybody has certain beliefs, whether they're scientific or whether they're not scientific, right? Everybody, okay, avoid certain things. Don't drink too much, right? Don't drink too much alcohol while you're pregnant. Don't drink, right? You can read a million things about what you should and shouldn't do when you're pregnant and how that can affect the fetus. So if you view what you're about to hear in light of that, it actually doesn't sound so crazy. These two things cause it. Okay, maybe she did both or maybe just one of them. I don't, either one. She was baking or cooking in the heat of the day. So between the heat of the oven and the heat, remember they cooked outside. We learned this in Masechet Shabbat. A lot of their ovens were outdoors. So in the heat of the day, with the heat of the oven and the heat, all that heat caused the child to have this defect. And Shatya Shechra Marka, which there are two different interpretations, which seem to me to be somewhat opposite each other. One is she drank very diluted beer, and one is she drank very strong beer, which actually, right, sounds like don't get drunk too much when you're pregnant. It can cause issues. That sits more, sounds more similar, at least different than the heat. I don't know about the overheating, but anyway, those are, that's what they believed, right? It makes sense that everyone had these, tried to come up with what could have caused this. It's the same thing that goes on nowadays, right? Especially the kid is born with issues, right? Everybody goes back and says, what was I doing? What happened? What could have potentially caused this to happen? I'm Rav Yosef. This is what I heard. Rabbi Ami, Da'amal, who said, okay, I've heard him say this, that already in utero, he was, there was an issue, and I didn't know what he was talking about. Now I know. Thank you for clarifying this. Now they ask, so you take this man who was born with some sort of, you could see already there was an issue by how he was urinating, then jump 20 years later, can't have children, so we assume he's a saris chama. Gemara asks a good question, which is maybe he healed in the interim. Who's to know, right? It's true. We know from birth there was an issue, and we know later, but we have no idea what happened in the middle. And then he would be more like someone who had a shata kosher, right? According to Rabbi Akiva, that would make him a saris adam who would be able to do chalitza. So they say, we assume since the beginning and the end, right? It was all, he wasn't good then, he wasn't good then. We just assume in the middle as well. Mativ Rav Meri. Rav Meri now brings a contradictory source. He says, listen, when it comes to Bechor is a firstborn animal that goes to the Kohen. Kohen is supposed to sacrifice it. But if the animal is blemished, then the Kohen doesn't sacrifice it. He can eat it without sacrificing. So the question is, what's considered a blemish? And there's a type of blemish in the eye, which is like a watering of the eye, which it says there that Rabbi Chanina ben Entuginus Omer, when it comes to a blemish, there's two types. There's ones that will go away, that will heal, and there's ones that won't go away. So if you want to know if this is a blemish that's permanent, and then the Kohen can slaughter the animal and eat it without sacrificing, you check it 3 times within 80 days. Once at the beginning, once at the end, and once in the middle. So here you see, beginning and end is not sufficient. If it was just beginning and end, right? If we assume beginning and end means middle also, you wouldn't need to check it 3 times. All you need to do is to check it twice. So the Gemara answers, don't compare that issue with the eye to our issue, because l'chad ever chashina, when it's one localized issue, we're concerned that maybe it will heal in the middle. But even though it was messed up in the beginning and messed up at the end, but l'kule gufa lo chashina. But when it's the whole body, we're not worried that it's going to heal in the interim. This is very interesting that they view srisut as an entire, right? It's viewed as it affects your whole body. It's obviously something that's wrong with the entire body. And again, obviously not the entire thing, but a large part, right? Rather than just a localized issue. Now going to Rabbi Eliezer's approach. What we're going to do here is Rabbi Eliezer, we're going to remind you what he said. And then we're going to bring a source where it seems like he says the exact opposite. And then there are going to be 2 answers to how to reconcile these contradictory sources. So again, Rabbi Eliezer, looking back at our Mishnah, he said, low key, no, it's not like you said, Rabbi Akiva, but Ella, saris chama choletz v'chotzin lishto mipnei sheyesh lo refuah. Right, one from birth is choletz v'chotzin lishto because he has a way of healing. But saris adam lo choles v'lo chotzin lishto mipnei she'ein lo refuah. But a saris adam doesn't have a way of healing. So now they say uriminu. So basically, just to remember, the main part you have to remember right now is a saris chama, someone born with it would do chalitza. Now, uriminu, this seems to contradict the following source. Okay, we're not up to Rabbi Eliezer yet. Wait till the end of the source to get to Rabbi Eliezer. But the source says, if he's 20 years old and doesn't have shtei sarot, now we're obviously talking about a saris chama, one who was born into this. So they say, so a woman, what we're really talking here is a woman falls to yibum to a brother who doesn't yet have simanim. So when he gets to age 20 and he doesn't have any pubic hairs, they'll prove, number one, that he's 20 and, right, bring his birth certificate or something. I don't know what they did in those days. Prove he's 20, prove he has no hairs, and he doesn't do chalitza lo miyabem, right? If he's the only brother, she's exempt from yibum. Bat esrim, now if she's the woman and she is an aylonit, so again, she's going to be exempt. So again, how do we determine this? Bat esrim, if she's 20, v'lo ivia shtei sarot, and she doesn't have two hairs, yaviu ra'aya shi bat esrim via aylonit. So they would, right, bring a proof, and then lo choletza v'lo mityabemet, and then she doesn't need to chalitza yibum divrei Beit Hillel. So Beit Hillel determines that 20 is the age for both the male and the female to basically then determine that maybe they'll be exempt from chalitza and yibum. Beit Shammai omrim zev v'zev b'nei 18. The age is 18, not 20 for both male and female. Comes Rabbi Eliezer, and now goes to this question of who do we hold like? Well, Rabbi Eliezer omer hazachar kedivrei Beit Hillel unikeva kedivrei Beit Shammai mipnei she, right? This is no mipnei she'isha memeheret lavo lifnei ha'ish. Women generally physically mature before men, maybe also emotionally, I don't know. We'll have all sorts of things to say about that, but she will basically come to physical maturity before the men, and therefore her age is 18, his age is 20. So I'm going to paskin a little like Beit Hillel, a little like Beit Shammai, and that's what he says. Now, the bottom line of what he's saying is that at 18, we can determine that a woman's an aylonit to exempt her from yibum. From 20, we can determine the man is a saris to, again, exempt her from yibum if he's the only brother. So what do you see? He's talking about a saris chama, someone from birth, and he's talking about exemption from yibum and chalitza. So that would go against what he says in our Mishna, that only a saris adam is exempt. Saris chama would do chalitza and do yibum. So because again, yesh lo refuah. Remember, he said they can be healed. So how do we resolve this? Rabbi Shmuel, Rabbi Eliezer. He changed his mind. One source was before he changed his mind, one source was after he changed his mind. So, or, right? Yeah. So first he held one way, then he held the other. So the obvious question is, which way did he eventually hold? Is our Mishna showing his eventual or not? So so they asked a question, which one did he change his mind about? Tashma, they say, let's learn from here. The Tanya says in another braita, Rabbi Eliezer omer, saris chama choletz v'chotzin leishto, shekem b'mina mitrapim b'Alexandria shel Mitzrayim. Saris chama can do chalitza and yibum. Why? Because I see that in Alexandria, Mitzrayim, right, big city Alexandria, they have a cure for these kind of people, and they've fixed situations like this. So first of all, you see a bunch of interesting things. The first thing is, therefore, our Mishnah has the right version, right? The last version of Rabbi Eliezer. This braita that we quoted before was an earlier version. How do we know this? Just because there's another source, it could be this one was also earlier. So the assumption is that since he's talking about reality on the ground and he saw that people are curing this disease, therefore it probably changed his perspective and it's going by some reality on the ground. And therefore that seems to be the last opinion. That's at least one of the explanations as to why. What's interesting about this, right, is fascinating in terms of historically that there were ways they had of curing, right? Nowadays, I mean, this is one of the biggest things in science, modern science is to resolve these kind of issues. And even then, right, in Alexandria of Egypt, they had ways to cure people who were having issues with this. Okay, so in any case, and then based on that, he paskins halacha that must be the determining, right, that's the issue that determines whether someone's chayav in chalitza or not. So basically, they take this braita and they say, you can ignore it because it was an earlier opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, and he changed his mind. Second interpretation, Rabbi Eliezer, don't confuse Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer is an Amora, right, from Israel in the time of Rabbi Yochanan. he makes a comment about Rabbi Eliezer, the Tana, who disagree with Rabbi Akiva, right? And we have this contradiction. He said, oh, that source isn't a contradiction at all. La'olam lo hadarbe. He didn't change his mind. No, I can work all these sources out together. How so? The chitnana hi la'onshin. He was talking about at what age does the saris or aylonit become obligated in mitzvot that they will be punished for mitzvot if they don't do them. How do we read that in the source? Now, the source was talking about, the whole topic of the source was a woman who's waiting for yibum with a person who's a saris, right, who hasn't come of age yet. And we don't know yet if he's a saris or not. So we wait till he gets to age 20 or 18, and then we can determine he's a saris. And then same thing for the aylonit. And then Beit Shammai says, right, it's either 20 or it's 18. Comes Rabbi Eliezer and he says, I see you're arguing 2018. I'm going to tell you that for men it's 20 and for women it's 18. But he's not actually, when he says that, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he's not actually talking about the machloket at hand. He's talking about when we define a saris is a saris and an aylonit in terms of when do they become obligated and punished? When can they get punished for mitzvah? So we determine it at age 18 or at age 20, depending on whether they're male or female, but he wasn't talking about the topic they were arguing about. That was an argument by Beit Shammai, Beit Hillel about chalitza specifically, but I'm now putting it into a different category. Okay. I just want to read because I see you want clarification and I just want to read it a little more carefully. 1 second. Is the saris chama exempt from chalitza? So the question you're asking is saris chama exempt or not? That's exactly the debate Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Akiva. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer holds that a saris chama is chayav in chalitza and only a saris adam is exempt. And Rabbi Akiva says the exact opposite. A saris adam does chalitza because he had a shat kosher. He had a point where he was able to have children. And a saris chama doesn't because he never had a chance to and never will. So that's the right now. So Rabbi Eliezer says, no, what do you mean never will? Maybe he'll be cured, right? It's sort of an approach of, do you view this person as this is their status forever, or maybe they'll be changed, okay? And then you're asking about yibum. We talked about that yesterday, if you remember. Rabbi Akiva said a saris adam can do chalitza. We then saw later in the Mishna that he even said you could do yibum as well. Because if you can do chalitza, then you can do yibum. So it seems like you could do yibum. Okay, so now, although it depends, because then we had the problem, if you're a krut shuvcha, right, then it depends which one you go by and what opinion and what you hold. Remember, krut shuvcha, we said, is always bidei adam, not bidei shamayim. So if it's the bidei adam, then you have a bit of a problem. These are krut shuvcha, and then you really can't stay married. We talked about that yesterday. Anyway, I'm not going to go back there right now. Okay, itma. Now, an interesting machloket ensues from this thing that if we say this is gil onshin, right? So now, what does it mean? When normally a child becomes chayav mitzvot and punishable for mitzvot when they reach 12, if they're women, and a day, plus they need 2 pubic hairs, or for a man, 13 in a day with 2 pubic hairs. Now, this person never gets pubic hairs. So at 18 or 20, we determined, oh, you're saris or aylonit. It would seem like maybe they're only obligated in mitzvah from then. So here ensues an interesting machloket about itma. Achal chelev mi ben 12 v'yom chad v'ad ben 18. Okay, v'noldu bo simanei saris. This is a bit of a strange thing because it seems to be talking about ages of women, 12 and 18, right? Because we just said 20 for men and 13 is the age for men. And then it says noldu bo simanei saris, which is male. So some people say it really means aylonit, and this whole sugya is, it's really about women, not about men. Obviously, it would be true for both. So it doesn't, that whole issue is not really relevant because it's going to be relevant for both anyway. It's just a matter of what language are they using and what years. But let's just put that issue aside. Just know that there's a bit of a discussion about it. But either which way, you have a youth, a child who doesn't have any simanei bagrut yet. And they ate chelev. Chelev is a classic example. It's this forbidden fat of the animal, because it's the part that when they went to the temple, they would burn it on the altar, and therefore it's only in animals that can be offered on the altar. It's not on chayot, which like the tzvi, the ayil, those kind of the deer, which aren't sacrificed. Okay, we're talking only in animals that get sacrificed. Those fats are forbidden because in the time of the temple, they would be burnt on the altar, so we can't eat them. If you eat it unwittingly, you didn't realize, you thought it was shuman, you thought it was the regular fat, and it turned out to be the chelev, the parts that you're not allowed to eat. So you bring a korban chatat. Now, what if you're of the age where theoretically you're chayav mitzvah, but you don't have any simanim? Then, okay, now 2 things are going to happen here. Number 1, noldu bo simanei saris. you start to see signs in this child that they're a saris or an aylonit, okay, whichever way you read the sugya. What those are, we're going to see at the end of today's talk. Okay, we don't yet know what they are, but there are simanim that show that this person is heading in that direction. But then all of a sudden, they grow two pubic hairs. So now the question is, how do we deal with this person? Rav Amar, saris lemafreach. We ignore the shtei sa'arot because they have simanei saris. All they grew, I guess, were two hairs. We assume, right, the kid gets to 18. It's clear, or 20, right? It's clear there was saris or an aylonit. Retroactively, so if they ate chalev between the ages of 12 and 18, and now at 18 we determine they're an aylonit, retroactively, that woman has to now bring a korban for what she did, because now it's been determined that if they're not an aylonit, it's whenever they see two hairs that we're going to say that's when you're chayav a mitzvah. But if you're never going to see two hairs, even in this case where you saw two hairs, we ignore the two hairs because you already had simanim before that you're going to be an aylonit, and basically you end up being an aylonit. So we're going to ignore those two hairs, and we're going to say that you're actually chayav a mitzvah from age 12 and a day. So therefore, when you ate the chalev, you were actually obligated. And now at age 18, we're going to obligate you on a korban, something you did many years ago. It's a very interesting thing that he says. Shmuel Amal, katan haya ba'ota sha'ah. What are you talking about? This person was a katan at that hour. Now, what does Shmuel mean? So some people think that Shmuel's not addressing the two hair issue at all. Okay. And what he's saying is anyone who basically has simanei saris, we wait till they're 18 to determine, or 20, again, depending male, female, but in this case, right, they're talking about 18 and maybe female. And then we say, okay, from age 18, and Tosfot says this at the very end of the Tosfot, the last line he says, Shmuel's going to say they become obligated in mitzvah only at age 18. When you determine they're a saris, there's no retroactive. Some people say that no, Shmuel is having issue with the two hairs. Even though you had simanei saris, when you see two hairs, that's when you become obligated in mitzvah. So whatever age that was, that's when you become obligated. So there's two different ways to understand Shmuel's position. The Gemara is a little more interested in Rav's position. And the Gemara says, Mat kifla Rav Yosef. If Rav says that you're basically already from the age of 12, you're considered a gdolah, you're no longer a minor, then he takes issue with this and says, Rav, aylonit Rabbi Meir yehela knas. According to Rav's understanding, an aylonit, according to Rabbi Meir, should have knas. What on earth is he talking about? We need some background. If a man rapes a woman, ones, okay? Ones in the Torah, he's supposed to pay her father 50 kesef for the fact that he raped her. Now, it's determined, and there's machloket about what exact age is he obligated for ones. What's the age of the woman? So if you look in Rashi, aylonit Rabbi Meir yehela knas, it's about 10 lines from the bottom. 50 kesef, that's the knas he has to pay, which is equal to 200 zuz, which is the amount that goes in a woman's ketubah. Al matanya b'mesechet ketubot, in mesechet ketubot it says, aylonit en la lo knas v'lo pitui. She doesn't get the money for knas, she doesn't get the money for pitui. Be'elu naarot, okay, that's the chapter. Umukmina laki Rabbi Meir da'amar ketana en la knas. Now a ketana, a minor, doesn't get knas. Now, so they explained when they said the aylonit doesn't get the knas for honest, it's because it's according to Rabbi Meir, who thinks that a ketana doesn't get knas, a minor. Now, according to this, what does Rav say? She's not really a minor. Once she hits age 12, she's an adult. So why doesn't she get the knas? Doesn't make any sense. According to Rabbi Meir, she's not treated as a ketana from age 12. So she should be able to get the knas of the onus. To which the Gemara answers, Amar le Abaye. Abaye answers the question and says, right, Rav Yosef asked the question, Abaye answers and says, Mikatnuta yatzda lebega. You have to understand one thing very important about ages, okay? And we talked about this with Miun, if you remember. When a woman refuses a marriage, remember she has until what age? 12 and 6 months, right? 12 plus 2 hairs and then 6 months after that. The way we view a maturity of a girl is gradual. First, she's a minor. Then she hits age 12 and 2 pubic hairs. She's considered a naara. Okay, that's why naara murasa, all those laws apply. That's a betrothed woman, but she's a naara. She's not called a woman. Okay, she's called like a in-between. So the laws of naara murasa, the laws of rape, all that applies to a naara. A naara is the 6-month period from when she becomes of age until she becomes, later she's going to be called a bogeret, which is already a matured woman. So she ends up with this range of opinions. It's a good question why I see you're asking why that is about rape. I actually don't remember all the details, so I don't want to say anything without saying it properly, but I will commit to you that we will talk about it when we get to it, the sugya in Ketubot, okay? So patience, where Ketubot are our next Masechet. We're actually not even far from the end of Yevamot finally. So anyway, we'll get to it in Ketubot. We'll discuss that whole issue there. It's hard in Daf Yomi to get off into too many things all at once. So right now we're focusing on our topic. We're just kind of addressing it on the side. This is part of the idea of learning Daf Yomi, remembering that you'll get to things more as time goes on. So now, what's the obvious answer here? Since the laws of according to Rabbi Meir, again, it's according to Rabbi Meir that there's a ketana and a knas. Okay, not everybody holds that way, but he also holds that it's really only a naara because the bogeret already doesn't. Okay, so now we have this range where it works. That range doesn't exist in an aylonit because she doesn't have any range of development. So we say here, she skips the stage of naara. She goes immediately to a bogeret. That's why Rabbi Meir says no, because first she's a ketana, then she becomes a bogeret. She's never a naara. And naara is the only time you pay the knas. Amar le, Rabbi Yosef responds to Abaye, who was his student, and he says, well, halavai, I wish that all things great statements like that were said in my name, right? Like, what a great answer. It's a way of complimenting him. Detanya, now he says, because what you're seeing, I see it says it somewhere else. Detanya, ena saris nidon ke ben sorer or more. Okay, saris can never be a ben sorer or more. Why? A ben sorer or more, right? A rebellious son. Why not? There's also a very specific range in which a child can be called a rebellious child because, right, he has to fill in all the pubic hairs down below. And aylonit nidon naara muasa shemikatnuta yatzda lebeder. Okay, and an aylonit can never be a naara muasa, which we're now going to say is the same thing for the knas of the ones, because from katnuta she immediately became a bogeret. There is no intermediary stage. Okay, I assume again, I don't like to talk off the cuff without really looking it up properly, and I don't remember all the details, but I assume it's this issue that right before that she's too young. After that, she's already kind of on her own and responsible. And here in this in-between stage, she's kind of neither here nor there. And then for the Ben Sorer Mora, right, he's a rebellious son that can be obligated. Once he's older, he's already not so much a son anymore, right? He's out of his parents' domain. Before that, he's too young to be punished, right? So there's this in-between. So likewise for the naara, right? And also because it says naara, there's all different answers, but like I said, we'll see it then. Amar Rabbi Akiva, simanei saris va'aylonit uben shmona. So now this is similar to what we saw before, except we're adding in a very strange addition here. But let's start with the first. Simanei saris and aylonit, you don't do anything, meaning like, for example, you don't do yibum yet, right? We wait to see until they become, right, according to this source, until they become 20. Okay, you see there's a vacillation a little between, the 20, the 18, which one? Okay, but here it says 20. And what else do you wait to determine it till age 20? A ben shmona. What's a ben shmona? A child born at 8 months. Remember, we've learned this many times. They believe children are born either 7-month babies or 9-month babies. If someone's born in the 8th month, we wait and see to see if they're really going to make it. You would have thought 30 days. And we'll see the source that says, at 30 days, you can assume they're already going to make it. But you actually wait till they're 20 years old. Because maybe, right, they're not actually going to make it beyond this, okay? A little bit strange, but the Gemara is going to actually have a bigger difficulty, which is, what are you talking about a ben shmona? Ben shmona mikachaye? An 8-month baby doesn't even live at all. Like, what do you mean wait till they're 20? They never survive. How do we know this? Well, look at the way halacha treats them. And this is a difficult source to see, but you have to really believe that what they're talking about are really babies that are not going to make it, okay? Even though it's really hard to read this source, especially if you've ever had a child who's, has some issues at birth, it's a difficult source. Ben shmona hareu ke'evan. He's like a stone, meaning like a rock. We assume this baby's going to die any minute. And therefore, on Shabbat, rocks are muktzah, because what's muktzah? Something that has no use or purpose. So therefore, on Shabbat, asur l'taltalo, you can't carry the child, okay? again, you really have to view this in the sense that they really believed this child was about to die and that there was no way right nowadays, until proven otherwise, any parent is going to try anything and any doctor is going to try to keep this baby alive. Okay, but they really believe this was never going to make it, this baby. What can you do though? You have a problem. If you can't hold the baby, so it's hard to nurse the baby, right? And if the mother has milk coming in and gets engorged, she's going to need to express that milk. And right, what are we going to say? How could she really needs to nurse? Because otherwise she can get, we all know there's breast infections and things that could happen, and she could die from that. So imo shocha alavu minikto. So she can lean over and nurse the baby like that. Again, very hard to imagine the source. Okay, on Shabbat she can't hold the baby, but she can lean over and nurse the baby in that way. Mipnei sakana, because of the danger to her life. If right, Rashi even says it's a danger sakanat shnehem, although it's hard to understand that because we just said we don't really, right? We can't hold the baby at all. Anyway, very hard to understand the source. So what do they say? Well, there's two different types of 8-month babies. Okay, and 8-month baby that we're discussing, who is like a rock, is the kind that's just not going to make it. But kishe gamru simanav, okay, which we're going to see in a minute what that is. When we're saying wait till age 20 to see if they're really going to make it, it's when the baby comes out, I would say in simple words like that, fully formed, right? Whereas opposed to this baby comes out with major issues, right? And it's very obvious they're not going to make it. Also, nowadays we try everything we can. In those days, they probably had much less that they were able to do to be able to keep the baby going. And therefore, maybe it was really much more obvious that the baby was not going to make it. Titania. So it says in a braita, Ezehu ben Shmona, kol shelo kalu lo chadashav, right? It's one who didn't make it to the 9th month. Rebbe disagrees and says, no, simanam mochichim alav. It depends on, you look at the baby. It's not a matter of on the clock, how many months passed. You go by what the baby looks like. Sa'aro, and what is that? Sa'aro v'tziporav shelo gamro. Okay, how do you know it's not viable? If the hair and the nails are not grown. Okay, what exactly this means is a good question, right? Because many babies are born bald, but I assume there's, right, even bald babies have like little hairs. Maybe if it comes out with nothing, there's, obviously they had some way that what they determined what this was, even if it's not exactly clear to us. So now they say, Tama de lo gamru. Okay, the reason is because they weren't fully formed, it seems like, but hagamru, if they were. So why is it okay then if it's an 8-month baby and they don't believe 8-month babies are viable? It must have been a 7-month baby who ended up staying longer in the womb before he came out. In other words, right, since they believe 7-month babies were healthy babies and 9-month babies were healthy babies, if you had an 8th month, it was a healthy baby, it was because they waited a month before coming out, meaning they weren't properly formed. They just waited. Okay, now, they're going to say, so now there's this machloket between Rebbe, who thinks that there's such a concept of a 7-month baby that waits a month, and Tanakama, who thinks, no, it all goes by the clock, okay, by the timing. So now they say, wait. So Elahada Avi Ravatos Uvda Isha Shalach Balala Medinat. This is a very famous case, and I'd mentioned this in class before. I learned this when I was 2 months overdue with my first child, 2 weeks overdue, sorry, my mistake, a Freudian slip from the sugya, you'll see, 2 weeks overdue, okay, I was like 9.5 months pregnant and dying or almost, I gave birth exactly on that day, but I was, pretty late there and thinking this baby's never coming out. And then you read this source and what does it say? So there was a woman who her husband went Medinat Hayam, he went abroad, and he was there for 12 months. And then she gives birth. Okay, so now, whose baby is that, right? It's obviously not his baby, it's someone else's baby. So that child should be a mom's. What did Rav Tosfah say? Achsherei, said this baby must be the father's baby. So now we say, who does this go according to? He must have been going, which is really a question, because Rebbe disagrees with Tanakama. Usually we hold by Tanakama is usually representative of the rabbi's opinion. Rebbe said, right, it must be Kiman Ki Rebbe, to Amar Mishtahe. Okay, we assume the baby waited. The baby was ready at 9 months to come out, but waited an extra 3 months, right? That's when I heard that, I said, oh no, I'm really in trouble, right? I assume this is babies happening any day, right? And then you hear that and you're like, uh-oh. Thankfully, this is a source and this is a way to help mamzerim, really. That's why they did this. But they didn't really believe this was true, I don't think. And in any case, it's a good story. And I like it because it shows that they're trying whatever they can do, right? Even though normally you would definitely think this is not reality, but sometimes if there's some sort of way you can explain it, so they can help save a mamzer. So now they say he was holding like Rebbe, who says that the baby theoretically can wait in the womb. So they say, Kevan de'ika, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, da'amar mishteh, kirabim avid. Okay, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel also said this, and therefore they assume that it wasn't just Rebbe, it must have been other people as well. How do we know Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel said this? He says if the baby survives for 30 days, they're already not considered a nefel, meaning you could have an 8-month baby who could survive. It doesn't go by on the clock, right? Was it 8 months? Was it 7 months? Was it 9 months? But we assume that if it survived for 30 days, then it was viable, and it goes by that, which theoretically means the 8-month baby was a 7-month baby that waited 30 days before coming out. Again, this whole concept, I see you're asking in the chat, we've talked about this before, it's very hard to understand why they had this concept of 7 months and 9 months, and they thought 8th month, very hard to understand because we know the reality not to be this way. But right, that's a question. And the number 2 question is, if we say that already after 30 days, it's not a nefel anymore, so what's this thing that we have to wait till age 20 to really determine, right? And what halachic ramifications are there for that? You know, if a baby's born after 8 months, we wait till they're 20 until we do any maasim, until we assume this baby's actually going to live. It's a little bit hard to understand. Okay, the whole sugya is hard to understand because, again, there's certain things that they believed in that we see medically not to be the case. And then how do we rectify that, right? And again, the question is, how do you, are there any halachic ramifications to this in any case, right? And there probably aren't really nowadays any halachic ramifications to these sugyas of the 8th-month baby, but they are here, so we're going to learn them. Okay, Tanu Rabbanan. Ezehu saris chama. So now we're going to get into the simanim, okay? So what's a saris chama? Again, another source about what it means to be a saris chama from birth. What are the simanim? If he's 20 and doesn't have 2 sarot. Even if after he starts to have 2 sarot, it doesn't matter. We've determined there is saris at age 20. And here are simanim that we see for someone being a saris, and this refers back also to what we saw before about the simanim. Kol she'en lo zakan, he doesn't have a beard at all, okay, no facial hair. So basically the way most of these are going to come into the category, although not all of them, of hormonal issues, right? The hormones aren't exactly the way male hormones normally are, or the female aren't the way female hormones normally are. So he doesn't have facial hair. His hair is messed up. Okay, we don't know exactly in what way. Something's wrong with the hair on the body. His skin is very smooth, like a woman's skin. When you urinate, there's no foam on it. It doesn't foam up. What we saw before, that you look for a little child, right? That the urine doesn't create an arch shape. That the shikvat zera is very thin, okay, like diluted. Right? We know that urine has this smell to it. It like gets, I don't know if you call it fertilized, but it gets that smell to it. So it doesn't have that smell. If you shower, right, you bathe in hot water in the cold weather, and you don't immediately steam up after. Putrefy, that's a good word, thank you. And you don't kind of steam up after. I don't know if this means like also sweat in general, or just that no steam rises from your body when you go from hot to cold. Okay. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, right? Your voice is more like a woman's voice, okay? It doesn't develop, right? We know boys start to get deeper voices as they get older. Okay, so we saw all different descriptions. Aylonit, what about a female? Here you see it's 20, okay? Even if later she sees 2 sarot, same thing for her. She's considered an aylonit. Okay, no breast development. It's painful for her during relations. This can mean like she doesn't have curves in her body, right? Like the waist and the hips. Could mean maybe something else. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar right? Again, her voice is more heavy. Doesn't sound like a female's voice. Itmar. So now there's a machloket about all these simanim. How do we relate to them? Do you need all these simanim? Is one enough? Okay, basic debate. Itma, simanei saris, Rav Huna amar ad shiu kulam. Rabbi Yochanan amar filu be'echad mehem. Okay, do you need all of them or is one sufficient? Okay, so Rav Huna says if you have one, that's already simanei saris. And then again, if you don't have two hairs and you get to that age, right, we assume. Okay, also we saw how important the simanei saris were there before, that they can even negate two hairs according to Rav, and maybe even according to Shmuel, depending on how you read it. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan says, no, even one, right? Rav Huna says you need them all. Now they say about this machlok. If you have two hairs on your beard, okay, so the man grows two hairs, a little bit, right? A little bit of hair grows, then everyone agrees that you need all the simanei saris to prove you're a saris, because you already have one thing going against you. So if you want to prove saris, you have to have everything. The machloket is if he has no hairs on his face at all, then is one enough, or do you need more than one? Which really means two, because he already has one on his face, right? So now, Rabbi Baravua said to the rabbis, I knew baby Rav Nachman, go and check when he goes into the bathhouse. I'll give him my daughter to marry if his body starts to have this steam coming off of it after he gets in the bathhouse, right when he comes out in the winter months. So he basically wanted to check out. Now they assume that he wanted to check it out because he didn't have any hairs. And then they checked out, right? They wanted to check out, does he have other signs? So kiman, kirafuna, they assume it means ad shiu kulam, and that's why he's checking, because if there's no facial hairs, then you have to make sure he doesn't have any other simanim. So then he went to go check, right, to make sure he doesn't have other simanim. So they say, no, you don't need to read it that way. You could say Rav Nachman, he holds like Rav Nachman that one is Rav Nachman, right, who they were checking out, sibe dikna havdele. Maybe he had small hairs coming out of his face. And then he did have some hairs. And then the question is, right, then they wanted to, and then everybody agrees that ad shiu kulan, and that's why they were checking it out. So it doesn't necessarily prove anything about who he helped. The last thing we're going to do for today is saris lo choletz v'lo miyabem b'chein aylonit. We go back to the Mishna, and if you remember the structure of the Mishna, we started with, again, I started the Shiur with this today. I'll review. It had Rabbi Yeshua who said, I have this saris yes, saris no, right? And what do we do with that? I don't really know. Rabbi Akiva explained it one way, right? Saris adam versus saris chama, and Rabbi Eliezer explained it the opposite. And then we have this line, again, Rabbi Akiva was the one who said, a saris chama doesn't do chalitza, but a saris adam would do chalitza, right? But one who's born doesn't do chalitza. And Rabbi Eliezer says the opposite. Then we have this line that says, which is totally redundant, and I told you we get back to this, saris lo choletz v'lo miyabem, v'chein aylonit lo choletz v'lo miyabem. What do you mean? First of all, we said a saris maybe does, maybe doesn't, depends on which saris. And now it just says it very simply, he doesn't do chalitza and doesn't do yibum. And what the Gemara is going to point out is, notice this juxtaposition to the aylonit. Now, what's an aylonit? From birth, or it was inflicted upon him? Aylonit is always from birth, right? It's not like a woman who has some issue. That's why whenever we talk about it, it's not just any woman who has issues getting pregnant. It's specifically a woman who basically never reaches maturity. That's something that happens from birth. So, right, she's born into that. It's not usually from some external thing that causes it. So comes the Gemara to say, saris lo choletz v'lo miyabem b'chein aylonit. They point out the juxtaposition. Katani saris dumia da aylonit. They want you to know that the saris that they're talking about, that's lo choletz v'lo miyabem, is the one that's like the aylonit, which is the saris chama. Ma aylonit bidei shamayim, af saris bidei shamayim. Since, right, it was in the hands of God, meaning it happened to her from birth. Also, the saris is that way, which means stomach to Rabbi Akiva. The Mishna is basically saying we hold like Rabbi Akiva. Because he's the one who says it's the one that's bidei shamayim who doesn't do chalitza. And that's what they infer from the second part, that the Mishna itself is siding with Rabbi Akiva. And that's why they repeated it. Okay, we'll start with the next part of the Mishna in tomorrow's daf. So we'll stop here. Have a great day, everybody.